Hello and welcome to Indus News. Now we begin this hour with our top story, and that's the US Congress raising concerns over India's restrictions in occupied Kashmir. In a meeting of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee, Assistant Secretary of State Alice Wells called for the rights of Kashmiris to be respected. More in this report.
The actions by Prime Minister Modi's Hindu nationalist government in occupied Kashmir have triggered criticism by members of the US Congress. A congressional committee criticized India's curfew, communications blackout, and mass arrests in the occupied valley. Secretary of State Alice Wells said the US has urged Indian authorities to restore full access to services, including the internet and mobile networks. Wells urged India to take concrete democratic steps towards occupied Kashmir and to suspend all acts of violence.
But what I can assure you is that we are reaching out and engaging a wide cross-section. We are engaging at various levels and across ministries in the Indian government to make the case for why a political roadmap, something that we all understand how India moves forward to re-establish elected, state assembly, is what we would like to see out of our, democratic friend.
The Assistant Secretary of State said Kashmiris have a right to live in dignity and participate fully in society and governance. Wells said the U.S. wants to work with both Pakistan and India to pacify international escalation.
Indian government assesses Kashmir to be an internal problem, but obviously it's a problem that has external consequences that are meaningful, and including the deterioration in relations between India and Pakistan. And we take very seriously the escalation in rhetoric and tensions between two nuclear armed countries.
The committee also renewed U.S. President Donald Trump's offer to mediate the Kashmir issue if both Pakistan and India agree. Wells stressed on the importance of a political roadmap in negotiating Kashmiri's future.
Well, staying with Kashmir, and US politician Ilham Omar says India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a threat to the world's shared democratic values. She was speaking at a session of the US Foreign Affairs Subcommittee and criticized India's curfew and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir. She also spoke about the crisis brewing in the Indian state of Assam and said the exclusion of Muslims has the potential to create a Rohingya-like crisis. The Democratic lawmaker said it's high time to question Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's beliefs and values. Now, Pakistan says it will attend an upcoming four-party meeting on the Afghan peace process in Moscow. China, Russia and the United States will also participate in the talks. Foreign Ministry spokesman Mohammed Faisal said Pakistan will continue to try for peace in Afghanistan. He said Pakistan's role should be credited for creating international meetings for a peaceful resolution in Afghanistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan maintains his stance that the Afghanistan war can only be resolved through dialogue. The Taliban say China has invited them to attend a new round of intra-Afghan peace talks in Beijing next week. Taliban spokesman Sohail Shaheen said China's Afghanistan envoy Deng Xijun extended the invitation in a meeting with the group's leaders in Doha. He said the talks are planned for the 28th and 29th of October. Meanwhile, President Ashraf Ghani says he wants to start peace talks with the Taliban. In an interview, Mr. Ghani said negotiations will be his top priority if last month's election results declare him a victory. The EU and United Nations believe peace in Afghanistan can only be achieved through a negotiated political settlement. Representatives from all over Europe and the US, envoy for Afghanistan Zalmay Khalilzad, held a special meeting in Brussels. Khalilzad is on a tour to Brussels, Paris and Moscow to revive the Afghan peace process. In a joint statement after the meeting, representatives supported the renewed Afghan peace talks. The statement stressed the need for an immediate and sustainable ceasefire. Now, British police find 39 dead bodies in a container at an industrial estate in East London. The police have arrested the truck driver on suspicion of murder. Home Secretary Priti Patel has expressed shock over the incident. Police say the truck was believed to have come from Bulgaria and entered Britain through Wales 3 days ago. The process of identifying the bodies is now underway.
This is an unimaginable tragedy and truly heartbreaking. I know that the thoughts and prayers of all members are with those who lost their lives and their loved ones. I'm receiving regular updates, and the Home Office will work closely with Essex Police as we establish exactly what has happened. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary.
Now, as the war in Syria continues, the Russian military police have arrived in the northern Syrian town of Kobani to facilitate withdrawal of Kurdish forces from the safe zone. This is after Turkey and Russia declared an agreement that means the Russians will now help Kurdish forces withdraw from the safe zone. More in this report.
Russia has sent troops a day after agreeing on a deal with Turkey to clear the area of Kurdish fighters in 6 days. Meanwhile, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says the ceasefire between Turkey and the Kurds offers a chance for a political solution in northern Syria.
The first requirement for having a political solution is to stop the violence, is to stop the fighting. And what we have seen is at least some significant reduction in violence and fighting.
Earlier, Turkey said there is no need for a new operation in northeastern Syria at this stage. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said it would continue to monitor the situation along the Turkish border with Syria.
US Defense Secretary Mark Esper has arrived in Baghdad for talks with his Iraqi counterpart Najah al-Shamari on American troops staying in Iraq. Earlier, US troops withdrawing from northeast Syria crossed into Iraq. Esper will also meet Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi to discuss the US troop retreat from Syria. Esper said the troops withdrawing from Syria will go to western Iraq to fight ISIS. Earlier, the Iraqi military said US forces do not have permission to stay in the country and can only be there in transit. Currently, the US has 5,200 troops based in Iraq as part of an international coalition to fight ISIS. A US diplomat in Ukraine, William Taylor, has endorsed the impeachment against President Donald Trump. In his testimony, Taylor said President Trump linked US aid to Kiev to an investigation into former Vice President Joe Biden's son. In his 15-page opening statement, Taylor said Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky came under sustained pressure. The envoy said he discovered the Trump administration's irregular, informal channel of US policymaking in Kiev. Taylor said he sensed something odd which threatened to undermine ties between both countries. The White House responded to the testimony, saying it's part of a smear campaign from far-left members of the Democratic Party. Now, as the Brexit saga continues, British lawmakers have rejected the government's proposed timetable for passing legislation to ratify its Brexit deal. The move leaves Prime Minister Boris Johnson's vow to leave the EU by the end of the month in serious doubt.
Order! Lawmakers voted by 322 to 308 against the programme motion. Under this motion, the government proposed to pass the legislation quickly. Many lawmakers said it did not give them enough time to scrutinise such an important bill. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the UK will leave the bloc with his deal one way or the other. Opposition Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn said his party is ready to work with the government on a reasonable timetable. In an earlier vote, Johnson won approval for his Brexit legislation in a second reading. Lawmakers voted 329 versus 299 in favour of the Brexit legislation. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson will push for a general election if the EU proposes to delay Brexit until January 31st. The rejection has dealt a major blow to the UK Prime Minister's wish to deliver Brexit by the October deadline.
This House has just given its assent. And I thank.
Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back. Now, Israeli forces arrest 14 Palestinians across the West Bank. In a statement, the Palestinian Prisoner Society said Israeli police rounded up 8 Palestinians from East Jerusalem. 4 others were detained during multiple military raids across the southern West Bank district of Bethlehem. Israeli forces also conducted raids in Ramallah city. Nearly 6,000 Palestinians, including women and children, are currently jailed in Israel. Hong Kong has officially withdrawn an extradition bill that sparked months of violent protests. Introduced in April, the bill sought to legalize the extradition of criminals to neighboring countries and China. Despite the move, protesters refused to end their demonstrations. After weeks of protests, Chief Executive Carrie Lam suspended the bill on the 15th of June. The protesters demand an independent inquiry into the police's handling of protesters. Now, thousands of Syrian Kurds are trying to flee across the border into Iraq, but most are now stuck in a border town halfway through, struggling to find adequate support and resources. More in this report.
According to the UN, thousands are affected by the offensive, but only around 176,000 Syrian Kurds have made it to Iraq. The figure also includes some 80,000 children, who now face their future in bleak makeshift settlements. The rest are still stuck mostly in Kurdish-run Syrian towns like Hasaka.
Our houses are still destroyed. People are still displaced. People don't have money, so many people left for other countries.
Some live in a back classroom around 80 kilometers away from their hometown Ras Al-Ain, stuck in another town in northeastern Syria. This town is run by Kurdish officials autonomously for years, scrambling to cope with an influx of displaced people. These refugees are skeptical about the future of northeastern region because of distrust with the leaders.
The ceasefire is a mere game. The scheme is more than this. It targets all Syria, especially the Kurdish province of Al Jazeera. We're not optimistic. The international powers have concealed things at the expense of people. And this is obvious to the Syrian people who will pay the price.
Turkey launched its Operation Peace Spring against Syrian Kurds after President Donald Trump announced withdrawal of troops from the region. However, a deal has now been struck between Turkey and Russia, which allows both countries to conduct joint patrols on the border.
Portugal's two biggest pulp and paper firms are helping civilian protection units fight wildfires. At least 250 private firefighters protect 150,000 hectares of eucalyptus trees in a country regularly hit by deadly wildfires. More in this report.
Former volunteer firefighter Pedro Simoes is training a team of Portuguese paper industry employees. Their task? To defend the eucalyptus plantations owned by private paper companies. Eucalyptus is Portugal's green gold. It represents 4.6% of exports, with an annual turnover of 2.7 billion euros. The paper industry is the country's largest owner of forest land and is regularly accused of proliferating the species which is prone to fueling forest fires.
This idea of accusing the eucalyptus, no, it's not true. It's in fact the totality that must be blamed, the pines, the brush. The Portuguese forest has been abandoned in recent decades. That is what led to the big fires.
In 2017, the country was hit by the most devastating forest fires in its history. Over 100 people were killed and 500,000 hectares were burned. Privately hired firefighters say the lack of maintenance of trees on public land creates more work for them.
90% of our work is done outside of our plantations. The ideal scenario is to fight the fire outside of our properties. If fire arrives here, as we maintain our forests, it does not progress in the same way, and extinguishing the fire becomes easier.
Eucalyptus makes up 26% of the national Portuguese forest. The government has passed a law capping it at this level. To balance out the flora, experts say more oak, chestnut, and other fire-resistant trees should be planted.
Now, in Bosnia, a woman who lives in the village of Breeze has spent over 40 years of her life wearing only the colour red. The 67-year-old Zorica Rebanik has planned to live the rest of her life this way, even after she dies. More in this report.
Obsessed with the red colour, a Bosnian woman has been dressing in red from head to toe since her teens. The retired school teacher lives in a red house which she has decorated with the same colour furniture and houseware. She eats from red plates, drinks from red glasses and sleeps in a red bed.
When I turned 18, I had a sudden strong urge to wear red. I don't know how to explain that, but I was only listening to my body. I had to have all things red and I could not calm down until I had everything in a red color.
Wearing shades like scarlet and vermilion gives her the feeling of strength and power. Her obsession with the color has made her a local celebrity in her hometown.
During 40 years as a school teacher, I also bought red garments and shoes for the kids in the school. They liked me and always looked at me, admiring my red clothes.
Bosnians' own Red Riding Hood goes to funerals dressed in red, eschewing traditional black. She even has a red tile grave built for herself and her husband in her garden.
Now in business news, European stock markets are trading mixed amid further uncertainty about Brexit, and nearly all Asia indices also closed down in the absence of positive developments. The CAC 40 index in Paris is leading losses, down about 0.5%. Frankfurt's DAX is flat, while London's FTSE 100 is nearly up 0.5%. Tracking overnight losses on Wall Street, most Asian stock markets have closed lower. Leading indices in Shanghai and Seoul lost nearly 0.5%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index dropped 1%. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index gained 0.33%. Well, it's 28 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.